So, back in a previous life, I studied men's dating advice. I knew a lot of the guys teaching other men how to get good with women. Once I bumped into the legendary David D at a conference in LA. I went to lunch with Neil Strauss. I was on Skype interviewing Carlos Zuma, David Huygens, and Perrion, Dave M., and endless others. I knew exactly what the world's top coaches and gurus were teaching men. And 20 years ago, it all seemed kind of innocent. Now, I have a different perspective on that now, seeing how the seduction community has gotten twisted into the manosphere. But it didn't have to pan out that way. Once upon a time, men who were motivated to do well with women became better men for it. They delved into personal development. They studied health and fitness. They cultivated a brotherhood, and women reaped the rewards. Now, this video is for all of you who wonder how men got such weird ideas about women and dating. It's a potted history of the seduction community from my perspective as somebody who studied those early info products. Now, I will tell you what I remember, but I am no historian, and I'm sure the internet's going to correct me with what I get wrong. So get buckled in. This is going to be a long video, but by the end, I hope you'll understand men in a way that should give you some compassion and insight for the weird way they sometimes behave in dating. Because dating techniques do not come out of nowhere, they have a history, and this is that history. Hey, I'm Amy, and you're watching Your Brilliance TV. So, the seduction community, also known as the pickup community, is a modern phenomenon. Casanova has nothing on these guys. The community came of age with the World Wide Web in the 1990s, and it burst into popular consciousness in the first decade of the 21st century, thanks in large part to Neil Strauss's New York Times bestseller, The Game. Now, before then, men searching for dating advice found pretty slim pickings. Reverends wrote marriage manuals. Dear Abby gave sensible advice to young men in relationship dilemmas. But it wasn't until 1970 that the first pickup guide for men was published. Eric Weber's How to Pick Up Girls. Now, picking up girls was not the same thing as courting a girl with the goal of proposing to her. It was not about capturing the interest of one girl at all. It was about capturing the interest of a lot of girls. It was about developing charisma and personal presence and this persona that was going to drive women crazy. In other words, it was about becoming a player. Now, as women, we hear that word player and we immediately cringe because players are sleazy. They don't respect women. They use those cheesy pickup lines. Or do they? Well, let's try to put ourselves in a man's shoes. So try to imagine that you are an 18-year-old boy. You have never had a girlfriend. You've fallen in love with several different girls at school, but none of them would even give you the time of day. And it doesn't help that you are painfully shy and weedy and no good at all at sports. And you watch these girls strut down the halls with their jock boyfriends, and you notice that these guys act like complete jerks, and the girls don't even notice. You can't understand why a girl wouldn't want a nice guy like yourself. You would bring her flowers. You would write her romantic poetry, and you would tell her she's beautiful every single day. Now, you are surfing online one evening when you come across a website, and that website is plastered with pictures of beautiful women inviting you to enter. And that website tells you that all of these women are waiting for you. You don't have to be rejected any longer. No matter what you look like, no matter how badly you've done with women before, you can go home with the hottest girl in the club right under the noses of those jocks and jerks. All you have to do is memorize a few techniques. You have to learn a new vocabulary, and you have to learn strategy that is more like chess than football. And what do? Well, you abandon your old life without a second thought. You click that button and you're in. Now, as women, we know what it feels like to be invisible to the opposite sex. We can remember walking through those high school halls, clutching our books, and hoping a boy would notice us. But that experience doesn't help us in understanding what it's like to be a guy. Because his problem isn't necessarily getting noticed, his problem is getting rejected over and over again. And for him, rejection is worse than invisibility because it's one thing for girls not to notice him. It's another thing to get up the courage to go up to a girl and open his mouth to say something, only to watch her turn away or say, I have a boyfriend, without a second glance. It hits him in the gut, it punches his self esteem, and he finds it harder and harder to get up the courage to approach the next girl. And some men give up altogether. They succumb to what's known as approach anxiety. So men live in a different dating world to us. And even though for us it seems like they've got all the power because they get to choose us, many guys actually feel it's the opposite. They feel that it's women who have all the power because women have the power to choose. They can crush a man with a look or make his dreams come true with a smile. Now, for guys, even the nicest rejection is still a rejection. And not all women have the time or patience to turn men down gently, especially the more attractive a woman is, because she gets so much attention that she has to be curt or rude in pushing men away because she's just overwhelmed. A guy who has been rejected over and over and over and over again is the kind of guy who is particularly vulnerable to the promises of the seduction community. Because that community promises him that he will soon be able to attract the kind of beautiful women who right now don't give him the time of day. And in fact, the community whispers, these techniques work best on the most beautiful women, like models. And the community promises him that he won't have to continue risking rejection. Instead, women will begin pursuing him. He'll get to choose among all the women throwing themselves at him. And let me tell you, no guy is immune to promises like that. Even the most romantic, naive, tender-hearted guy alive would be interested in hearing how he could overcome rejection. So, who is in the seduction community? Are they all bad guys who are studying manipulation tactics in order to take advantage of as many women as possible? Well, you might think that, but the answer is no. Although some guys do join because they want to learn how to exploit women, and that may be a fairly high percentage of them, many become involved because they are good guys with good hearts who just want to know how to stop the pain of rejection. So, back in the late 1980s, the infamous Ross Jeffries began teaching workshops on seduction. Jeffries argued that his techniques could enable any man to bypass a woman's natural preference for certain guys over others. He taught neurolinguistic programming in order to hypnotize women into feeling attraction. And the newly launched World Wide Web gave Jeffrey's seduction students a way to network online and share their ideas. This meant the seduction community could spread like wildfire. Men started meeting up in layers in major cities around the world to go out on the town. They practiced seduction techniques on women in clubs and bars, and then they analyzed what worked and what didn't. Being a pickup artist, or PUA, was akin to being an amateur scientist, and it was taken just as seriously. PUAs practice approaching as many women as possible to achieve certain goals, like getting her phone number, getting a kiss, getting an invitation back to her house. And they documented their experiences in what was known as field reports, which they posted online and discussed. Now, what felt so revolutionary about the seduction community at the time was its inclusive nature. No one was turned away. It did not matter how little experience a newbie had, all that mattered was his enthusiasm for learning. Now, over time, certain pickup artists rose above the pack to become mentors or what was known as gurus. And one of those gurus was Style, who was known in the real world as the journalist Neil Strauss. Strauss wrote an expose of the seduction community that reached the New York Times bestseller list in 2005. And then VH1 filmed Neil's mentor Mystery to capitalize on that interest. As Neil explained in his book, The Game, the community served a real need for men in its early days. It created a sense of brotherhood. It taught men to pursue physical excellence inside and out. And it played an important role in the modern men's movement, helping men regain their sense of personal power amid the confusion of gender politics. There's no initiation ceremony or rite of passage in modern society that marks the transition from boy to man. So young men often feel stuck. No one is systematically teaching them confidence or how to go after what they want or how to deal with rejection. No one, that is, except for the seduction community. Learning how to pick up women helped guys learn how to be men. It gave them the social skills, the conversational skills, the self discipline, and the polished look that they desperately needed to succeed in the world. The only fly in the ointment of this big, happy male bonding fest is, what about the women? So, true confession, I don't go out to bars and clubs. I tend to like to stick close to home. And so the chances of me actually running into a pickup artist in my everyday life are pretty slim. I had to go out of my way to pursue interviews with pickup artists. And the men I interviewed back then were usually online entrepreneurs who are teaching workshops or creating programs or taking groups of men out on the town to practice their skills. Now, across the board, the pickup artists I met were intelligent, well presented, passionate about their work, and depressingly ordinary guys. Now, reading their works back in the early aughts, I had hoped that I would experience some of that charismatic power myself. And instead, I just found that I liked the guys. I really liked them. These seemed like really good guys trying to do something good for humanity. So, women, they thought, shouldn't be criticizing the seduction community's methods when they clearly showed they preferred the results. Now, in many ways, I could see their points. What woman wouldn't pick a polished, confident, interesting guy over a bumbling, insecure, geeky one? And it brought up a lot of questions. Like, would you stop dating a guy if you learned he had been studying seduction techniques? Why is it okay for women to read books on how to get a man to propose, but not okay for men to download ebooks on how to get a woman into bed? Aren't those double standards? And is that really fair? Women tend to be more willing to admit they have studied and used dating advice, but it is a lot more common among men than we realize. I think most guys today have browsed dating advice online, and they do it for the same reasons we do it, because it's everywhere. And those headlines pique curiosity. Now, I am sympathetic to both sides of the dating spectrum. I feel for women who just want Prince Charming to drop from the sky. And I feel for men who've retreated online because real world dating is just too depressing. As women, we sometimes forget that men are human too. They lose courage, they flake out, they don't know what to do to get our attention and keep it. If men were better supported, then maybe they would be better boyfriends. Maybe we women would have a better dating experience if all men received some kind of dating coaching. But the problem is right now, men are teaching other men about women without actually understanding women very well at all. They're not talking to women to get a female point of view, they are keeping women out. This is an all guys club. And in fact, many seduction gurus caution men. They say, never take a woman's advice because what women think they want is not the same as what women actually go for. If a man took a woman's advice, they say, he'll just end up in the friend zone. He'll be the kind of nice, romantic, thoughtful guy that gets ignored in favor of jocks and jerks. Much better, they say, to take a scientific approach. Go out in the field and test what actually works. Experiment. Observe how women actually respond rather than how they say they would respond. And in the process, they'll promise, you will discover universal truths that even women themselves aren't aware of. So, yeah, pickup artists would have us believe that they understand us better than we understand ourselves. But do they? The early seduction community had this very strange blind spot. It ignored the fact that most women are completely normal. Instead, the community almost exclusively focused on exceptionally beautiful women. They employed this rating system where a woman was referred to an HB7 or a hot babe whose attractiveness rated 7 on a 1 to 10 scale. And of course, a 10 would be the equivalent of like a Sports Illustrated model. Now, for pickup artists, these exceptionally attractive women made more desirable targets because they were harder to approach. Because women who get a lot of male attention tend to reject guys right off the bat without bothering to be polite. So much of the seduction community strategy focused on cracking those difficult scenarios. The thinking went that if a man could approach an exceptionally beautiful woman, he could do it with anyone. Now, in particular, the earliest seduction strategies focused on what to do in bars and clubs. Now, there was some information on day game, which meant approaching women during the day, but most early pickup strategy was designed for urban nightlife. But the problem was the kind of hot babes these guys were targeting in bars and clubs were nothing like the average woman. Because if you're like most women, you might be tucked up in bed watching Netflix on a Friday night. You might be spending Saturday hanging out at a friend's home. You may not have the time or energy or money to go out regularly. And when you do, you may completely avoid the bar and club scene. And good for you, because that means you're avoiding the pickup artist's main stomping ground. Now, if you are normal, and by definition, most of us are, you may not rate highly enough to trigger a pickup artist radar because they're not interested in the fives or sixes. They're going after the eights, nines, and tens. And even worse, you might be a nice person who talks to every guy who makes the effort. And pickup techniques often backfire with nice girls because nice girls really don't enjoy talking to rude guys. Like, take the classic neg. I'm sure you've heard of negging. I think it's over now because it kind of fizzled out once women cottoned on to it. But back in the day, a neg was a negative compliment. So a guy tells you something that sounds kind of nice, but then he reverses its meaning sarcastically. So he might say, "Oh, I love your hair. Looks just like my crazy kid sisters." Now, pickup artists claim that negging works on beautiful girls because those girls are so used to hearing compliments that a man who's not impressed by their looks will stand out from the crowd. But if you are an absolutely normal woman, negs feel rude and uncalled for. David D'Angelo's cocky funny technique taught a lot of men to act like jerks by saying these outrageously rude things in a funny way. Because after all, if it's meant ironically or in good humor, it's not offensive, right? But let's say, for argument's sake, that you do end up in a club on a Saturday night with a group of friends, and a guy approaches you. And this guy is a pro. He smoothly engages you in conversation, and you don't even think about escaping him because you are laughing and chatting with this handsome stranger who is so much more vibrant and interesting than anyone else in the club. He's better dressed, he's a better conversationalist, and he seems to have led such a fascinating life. And you glance over at your girlfriends and they give you the big thumbs up because they can't believe your luck. And you can't either. Pickup artists understand our weak point. They know that our greatest fears include being bored, which is why they will spend all this time developing interesting talents and hobbies and anecdotes to charm women. Being stuck with a guy who won't go away, which is why they will often tell you straight up that they have to get back to their friends in just a minute. Not having anything to say, which is why many pickup artists used to ask for a female opinion on something just to get a conversation going, and being creeped out, which is why they make it clear that they don't want anything from you. They're just having fun and you seem like someone sweet. But there are plenty more fish in the sea. Other recommendations from the pickup community include never offering to buy a girl a drink, ignoring the fact that she says she has a boyfriend, being nice to her friends so they will support her in going home with him, and alternating between interest and disinterest so she's never quite sure where she stands. Now, do those recommendations actually work? Well, yes, they worked especially well back in the day when no one knew about them. Yes, we do tend to automatically think less of a man if we feel like he's trying to buy us with a drink or a compliment. And seeing you have a boyfriend is a time honored way of letting a man know you're not interested, and it may not even be true. But even if you do have a boyfriend, you're probably not averse to chatting for a few minutes with a handsome stranger. So is it so terrible when a guy ignores the comment you made about your boyfriend? Maybe not. Now, most girls hopefully are not going to ditch her friends for a guy. But what if that guy came over and he charmed your entire group? What if your friends were open mouthed in awe that this amazing guy was hanging out with you? Wouldn't they be supportive if you wanted to leave with him? And lastly, look, nothing is creepier than a guy who thinks you are the love of his life and you've just met. A guy who comes on that strong can be really unpleasant. But a guy who likes you, just not that much, is actually easier to be around. So if he shows you a little interest and then backs off, it actually gives you a break to decide for yourself how you feel about him. So are these men manipulating us, or are they just learning from experience what actually works? Is it their fault that what actually works best with most women is not the same as what we want them to do in our ideal world? What do you think? So I made a sweeping generalization earlier when I said that the seduction community was an all guys club. There are women in the seduction community, and they're often the girlfriends of the pickup artists. Now, these girlfriends know exactly what their boyfriends are doing, and in most cases, they are extremely supportive. They wouldn't be with a man like that unless they were on board with what he's doing. Now, back in the day, I spent some time with one of those girlfriends, and she was absolutely lovely. And her boyfriend was involved in the community too. And she was interested in getting involved herself as a wing woman, a girl who goes along with the guys to bars and clubs to help them chat up other women. But she also wondered how single women might be able to benefit from these new ideas. In her perspective, men had taken their dating future in their own hands, while women were still largely going to outside experts for advice. So was she right? Could the seduction community have anything to offer women? So women have known for thousands of years how to maximize sex appeal. When I grew up, little girls were expected to take ballet classes to improve their posture and learn to move with grace. It was silently understood that those traits would maximize feminine allure later in life. So, at a cursory glance, men seem to be way behind the times because they don't start thinking about how to be attracted to women until their hormones kick in. But there is one new thing that the seduction community pioneered that women could learn from. It treats dating as a practical science. On their online forums, the community would collect field reports from thousands of men all over the world and then formulate strategies and systems based on what these men found actually worked in practice. So it was like citizen science. They were gathering lots of data, they were observing patterns, and attempting to build a working hypothesis. So the early seduction community was results oriented. It didn't care why something worked or whether it should work. Instead, it asked, does this achieve the desired result or not? And that was all that mattered. Now, that's not the way that we tend to think as women. We tend to like psychology. We like breaking down the details of our dates with our girlfriends. But going on date after date and then posting analyses of our technique with strangers on online forums, yeah, we're not going to do that. And besides, for most women, the goal is not to master hooking a man in 15 minutes or less, it's to meet the love of her life. And she only has to succeed with one guy to get happily ever after. Now, that's another place where the seduction community goes in the opposite direction to most women because they believe it's a disease to get hung up on any one person. In fact, they even have a term for it, one-itis. So one-itis is often what brings men to the seduction community, but the community stamps it out of them pretty fast. Men swiftly learn that the seduction skills they're studying are not to be used on that one particular girl they think they need to win over. Because according to the community, being hung up on any particular girl puts a man's self-esteem at risk by placing his future happiness in her hands. It teaches that men need to stay in charge of their own happiness, and a man must never base his self-worth on female approval. So, to master the art of seduction, men must learn to see women as replaceable. If one woman doesn't bite, no worries, you just move on to the next. Men are even encouraged to approach random girls on the street to practice their skills, even if they are not in the slightest bit attracted. And in fact, being too attractive to a girl can prove a hindrance for beginners because the more he's attracted, the more likely he is to mess the whole thing up. Now, most women would find it distasteful to chat up a man they weren't interested in the slightest. There aren't many women capable of seeing boyfriends as interchangeable parts because it is so tough to find a decent guy. You don't want to let him go once you found him. So if one-itis is a disease, it's one we wish more guys would catch. But everything I just told you was current 20 years ago. Since then, the seduction community has evolved. Parts of it have gone off in very extreme directions. You can think of Andrew Tate. Well, many of those original pioneers in the movement ended up getting married and having kids and changing their views on what they were taught. Because being a dad to a daughter really changes how you think about women. You start to see the problems in treating women as objects. Now, some of those original seduction gurus have pivoted to teaching women how to attract men on the basis that they understand the hearts and desires of single men better than anyone. But the concepts they laid down all those years ago have made it into the drinking water. Most men today know that they need to avoid the friend zone. Don't be such a nice guy. Do what works. Don't do what women say they want. So, what does that mean for us women? What is my advice to you? Well, it's simple. Talk to the man or men in your life. Tell them what you've learned in this video. Ask them if they have gotten dating advice online and has it helped? How do they think men should be learning about women? Is there anything women could do to make it easier for men to build a relationship? And don't be afraid to take an honest look at your own dating habits. Like, do you dismiss nice guys as just friends while secretly admiring the bad boys who treat you like a jerk? Because we women get a lot of bad dating advice too. So look at that. Do you reject men who approach you, or do you appreciate a man's courage in making an effort? Now, it has been decades since the seduction community broke into front page headlines. These days, you're just as likely to come across scathing criticisms or exposés of the sordid lives of so-called pickup gurus. Even Neil Strauss, the best known pickup artist of them all, wrote a book about his difficult path to monogamy and family life in the suburbs. So most of these guys get there in the end, even if they started out thinking it was about getting women or the lifestyle or admiration. they learned the truth was so much simpler. It was actually just about finding somebody to love you. And lucky for them, that's something that you won't forget. Now, one last thing. You might be wondering what I have learned and taken away from 20 years in dating advice. I wasn't just an observer, I also practiced a lot of what I taught. And 20 years on, I no longer believe half of what I used to teach because the world has moved on. That old advice does not fit our 21st century lives anymore. Most young people these days want a soulmate. They want someone who vibes with them, and they don't care if that person is a catch. They just want that one person who gets them instinctively and laughs at what they laugh at and likes to do all the same things they do. And to me, that sounds just about perfect. So if you are ready to move into the new era of love and dating, then I strongly recommend hopping onto my newsletter list where I email women every week with what I'm researching, what I'm thinking about, and what I recommend for lasting healthy love. Because today, love is still the most important thing around, but dating advice is no longer pointing us in the right direction. So to get signed up, go to yourbrilliance.com/free-gift. Again, that's yourbrilliance.com/free-gift. I hope I'll see you there.